Hey kids, this is Ivan. Today I'd like to talk to you about wilderness adventures and wilderness campaigns. Now, a lot of DMs get a little bit freaked out and intimidated by setting up a wilderness campaign for the first time or just in general, and I can understand why because it's a physically large area and it's not quite as defined as something like a dungeon or a city because there's a lot of latitude. It's this big expanse of open country. But the whole thing dovetails pretty well with the idea of sandbox campaigns I was talking about before, because in a way, like a wilderness area is the ultimate sandbox. I mean, you can go north, south, east, west, wherever you'd like to go. And of course, in a sandbox campaign, most of the places that the adventurers are going to be traveling through to get from point A to point B is going to be a wilderness. So, it is kind of the ultimate sandbox campaign. But I think people get a little bit too freaked out about it, and so I'm just going to kind of explain why and what I do when I set up a wilderness campaign or just a wilderness area. Now, it really helps to think of a wilderness as being akin to a dungeon or a city. Instead of rooms, there's going to be layers and areas of interest. Instead of corridors, there's going to be expanses of wilderness between these, areas of interest where you may or may not encounter something. Instead of traps, there might be dangerous areas. There might be rock slides. There might be a dangerous bridge. There might even be some traps that some of the local inhabitants have set up to waylay travelers or just to keep people away from what they're doing because they don't want somebody to find out or they're just scared of intruders, that sort of thing. So let's use like a hypothetical example. Say you've got two major cities or towns. And say in between those two cities there's a road. Maybe the road goes the whole way, maybe it doesn't. But around those cities or towns and in between them, there's going to be this large expanse of wilderness. Now, perhaps there's a large expanse of like plains or scrub or rough country you can see across. Adjacent to that, maybe there's a hilly area. And perhaps there's going to be like some mountains. Maybe there'll be small mountains or even some large mountains. Of course, there's going to be the obligatory forest. You need the dark, deep, mysterious forest and that whole thing. Maybe the road actually goes through the forest. Maybe the road actually goes through one of the mountain passes. There could be bodies of water. There probably should be around cities. So there might be a river that runs adjacent to these areas, maybe through the forest, maybe through the mountains. There should be some lakes. Some ponds, and of course, to add some more fun to it, you can have some swamp areas near these bodies of water because, of course, these are fraught with peril and danger. Now, instead of rooms, like I said, there's going to be areas of interest and lairs and other major places. Some of these will just be small villages, farmlands, where all the peasants live. There could be woodcutter or trapper or hunter camps. There could be some isolated cottages. And within the various wilderness areas, there's going to be some actual dungeons, which can be standalone adventures or just stumbled upon. Maybe there's an old wizard's lair, wizard's tomb that was hidden for centuries by an illusion, but now that illusion has failed, so the door in the rock face is now evident, and either somebody finds this and tells the adventurers, or they stumble upon it themselves. Maybe there's an abandoned castle in the hills, and it's full of mystery, and there's catacombs underneath, and nobody wants to go near it because it's supposed to be haunted. There might be a secret cult lair somewhere in the woods, which may or may not still be occupied, and maybe it has, just caverns underneath it and can go, who knows how far under the earth and to some really nasty stuff. So, you can have fun with just having those standalone, major places of interest in a wilderness area. But as far as lairs, let's say in the hills, there's a group of trolls, and they move down from the mountains, and they live off the land, but they're also kind of waylaying travelers because they're big, nasty trolls, and they can eat you. Where the forest ends near the farmlands, let's say there's an old owl bear, and, every once in a while he supplements his diet of deer by eating the farmer's cattle. But, no, everybody's afraid to go fight this thing because it's big and giant and huge, and it's already killed a couple of the farmers. So maybe that would be a neat thing for the adventurers to take out or stumble upon or what have you. Let's say there's a medium-sized green dragon, something really nasty, and he lives, kind of half in the woods and half in the mountains right where they meet, and he's just kind of setting up his own lair. But, of course, nobody dares to really mess with this dragon. Let's say that somewhere in the forest there's this old druid and his druid followers, and he's kind of appointed himself, the protector of that particular forest. And let's say somewhere near the road, in the scrub area, whatever, there's a lair of goblins and bugbears. And even though they live off the land and hunt and all this kind of stuff, they ambush travelers whenever they can because they're just nasty folk, and that's what they like to do. And let's say we got a pair of cockatrices, and they have a lair, and they kind of fly around, but there's a nest, and maybe it'll have some nifty stuff in it. Say a section of the woods has some dryads and treants and some ants living in it, and you might stumble upon that area. That could be, interesting in one way or another. And maybe in the mountains there's a group of gnomes, and they found this rich lode of gold or gems or whatnot. And they're nice gnomes, but they're a little paranoid because they're pretty sure somebody, if they find out, might steal their stuff. So they're going to be a little crafty or whatnot. And say in the swamp you've got maybe like a shambling mound or something like that, or maybe some like really nasty creature with lots of tentacles that can, kind of like, jump out of the water and attack and eat people. And maybe like the possessions of all its former victims are all over the place. So there's a lot of treasure, so to speak, in that area. And say somewhere in the outskirts of the forest there's a yellow musk creeper and might have some of its zombies there, and the party might stumble upon that. Maybe there's a cottage in the woods that's inhabited by a crazy old man, or perhaps by a couple of wereboars that are just living away from society because, they just don't quite fit in. They're not really bad, but they're wereboars. So they can be a little interesting. And maybe within the plains there's some old tombs that, might be populated by undead, who knows, like the Barrow White type thing, etc. You can set up a lot of specific lairs in the wilderness land, kind of figure out where they are. It doesn't matter whether you use hexes or a square grid or just draw it freehand, but you kind of know where these major areas are, and those are your rooms, so to speak. But the list can go on and on. But you select the areas that have definite inhabitants. Other things in the wilderness, like I said, could be akin to traps. There could be the falling rocks thing in the mountain. There could be a bridge over a chasm that's likely to fall. So when you're going across it could be rather dangerous. And of course, there could be traps set by the goblins, by the trolls, maybe even by the druid or the gnomes, because they're just not really into people going into their areas. And there's other areas you can designate to just be mysterious. They don't really have inhabitants or treasure or what have you in there. But there could be, a ring of stones that's really mysterious and is it an old druid thing? What the heck is it? Was it an old temple? There could be wizard marks, that spell on various rocks indicating where a wizard once passed. There could be a valuable-looking item just lying out in the open, and geez, what's up with this? So you have some other kind of like more rooms in the wilderness area. Now, after you figure all that out and you stat the monsters, you figure out what kind of treasure they have, all their hit points, armor class, all that junk. Then you kind of have to figure out about wandering monsters. Now, I personally don't like the idea of like rolling on the random tables and like all the monster manuals, because I don't want to have 2,591 species of monsters in my wilderness area. I'd rather kind of have that make sense. So you can make one table by yourself for the entire wilderness area if you'd like. I personally like to make a separate table for each location, and of course there can be some crossover. Maybe you can meet the roaming pack of wolves anywhere, but you're only going to meet the green dragon like in the mountains or right in that section of the forest. You're only going to meet the druid around his area. You're only going to meet the trolls in the hills. If they're just wandering around, that sort of thing. And it might not be all the trolls. It might be one. You might meet a wandering goblin raiding party just about anywhere. And you can set these things up either like with a D20 roll, or sometimes I like to do percentage dice because then you can kind of control like what's the possibility. Maybe it's only a 3% chance of meeting the green dragon, but it might be a 15% chance of encountering a bunch of brownies that are just going to cause some mischief, and maybe it's a 10% chance of encountering the raiding party of goblins, etc. Maybe it's a 5% chance of meeting the cockatrices. Oh boy, they could cause some problems. And of course, then you can just stat all those things out, and then you're ready, like when you need to roll for a random encounter. Now, all the encounters don't need to be conflicts. You can kind of figure out for each random monster, random wandering monster, if you will, what their possible reaction to the party would be. Maybe the trolls will just always attack. Maybe the brownies are just going to cause some mischief and pelt the party with acorns and sticks, or tie their shoelaces together and do kind of weird stuff until the party figures out what's going on. Maybe the wolves will kind of track them and see if they're good enough to eat or whatnot. Maybe the goblins will sit there and try to ambush them, but just follow them for a while. Maybe the party can spot them. And other things you can just kind of roll for randomly, like what's the reaction going to be like. But they don't all need to be conflicts. I mean, sometimes you just have the dragon or the cockatrice fly overhead, and you're like, oh man, look at that. That's pretty creepy. Thank God that thing didn't, come down. Maybe you'll encounter like a hippogriff, like eating a horse or a deer, and you guys kind of, all your horse is shy, and you kind of, ride by that as fast as you possibly can because it's too busy eating something else. Maybe the party can start to forge alliances or relationships with some of these people they meet. Maybe with a druid, maybe the gnomes, maybe with a lot of different races or things that live in there. So the party can actually develop relationships and forge alliances, and have adventures just as complex as they would in a city in the wilderness area. Because the wilderness can be a place of death and despair and danger, but it can be a place where the campaign takes on a lot more meaning and flavor. Now, in terms of when to roll for an encounter, all the various D&D books have tables in them, like when you're supposed to do that. You can use the rules in the book or just use your own common sense. Maybe, like a lot of times at night, I'll roll once for each of the 3 watches. It'll be a low percentage, but there's a fire going, so they're attracting some attention. During the day, you can roll as often as you like. If the party's making a lot of noise, then you might need to roll more often. If they're going right through the trolls area, you probably need to roll relatively frequently, or because the trolls might spot them and try to come out and eat them, that sort of thing. So it's your call, like how often you want to roll for that kind of stuff. Now, also, like when a lair or an area of the wilderness gets cleared out by the party, whether it's like one of those dungeons, like the mysterious castle, or the goblin lair, or the troll lair, or whatever it is, nature abhors a vacuum. Something else is going to move in there. So the wilderness can be a really dynamic place. And it can provide adventure after adventure, because often the party is going to have to travel through these wilderness areas again and again and again. And, it can be a little bit different each time. Sometimes they can meet their old friends. Sometimes they can conduct trade with them. But sometimes new things are going to move in, and things are going to be a little different. Just like in a dungeon you clear out. Once you clear out a dungeon, you put some new stuff in there. And, ditto for the old, haunted castle. Maybe they clear that whole thing out, but then maybe, the goblins or the trolls take up a residence there and invite some more of their buddies. Maybe the dragon decides to move into it or something. There's other things to consider in the wild in terms of chances of going the wrong way, getting lost. A lot of books handle these. You can use common sense if you want to, use your own rules. It doesn't really matter, just the idea that you can alter them as you see fit. But, in my opinion, wilderness adventures can and should be a large part of the campaign. You just think of The Hobbit or most fantasy books. What are the characters doing most often? Where are they? They're going from area A to area B. And where are they when they're going through there? They're going through the wilderness. They're going through the great outdoors. And, so you can easily get a campaign to the point where you and your players enjoy the wilderness part of the campaign more than you enjoy, anything else, more than the dungeon crawls, more than the city adventures, more than the political intrigue. The wilderness can be a great place. So I would say go out there and, make up a fun world, not just dangerous, but, fun to interact in and forge alliances. But, don't just do the dungeons and the caverns and the castles and the cities, but have some fun with the wilderness, because that can provide hours and hours of entertainment and fun.